I got the impression that you're setting up, or I made a judgment that you're setting up a duality between the divine love path and the so-called natural love path.
Yep. The truth is actually that the divine love path incorporates the natural love path. So if I can just illustrate that, I'm going to need a... It's a bit hard to do things with a mic, and so let me illustrate that. There is no problem with displaying natural love. In fact, God designed you to display natural love in order to be happy if you wanted to be happy without God in your life. So in other words, if you wanted to be happy without choosing God-reliance in your life and instead just be completely self-reliant, or you wanted to make up your own rules about God and your own rules about life, if you want to be completely happy, you will have to at some point follow one of the natural love paths. Now, there are literally millions of them because mankind has set up so many millions of ideas and paths as a result. But what happens is, if you look at the natural love path, if I can follow it up like so, in terms of its progression, remember we have spheres or dimensions or spaces, and on Earth we can progress through them just as well as we can in the spirit world. So there's let's say that's the natural love path, that arrow. Now, when I say natural love paths, there are obviously millions of them. Now, as they progress, these paths, they all become refined by the steps of love that need to be taken. So in the first sphere, for example, there is very little love in the first sphere in terms of what people learn about in the first sphere. And so initially, a lot of our religious beliefs on Earth have a lot of death in them. They have a lot of fear in them. They have a lot of beliefs that you can kill other people for the sake of your beliefs in them and things like that. So if you think about it, a lot of the religious beliefs that are on the planet right now, while some of their concepts are highly idealistic, other concepts that those same religions have are very base and fear-based. In other words, they're very debased. You look at the concept that I can kill you if you don't have the religion that I have, for example. That's obviously a very dark place. So it's not very love-based. So as we progress in love on the natural love path, eventually we're going to have to make these steps into new and more loving spaces. And that's beautiful. That's an essential part of our progression as the human race. But we have the option as well of this other path. It's not something that is mankind created. It is God created. So all of these paths are the paths that man has stated. And eventually, the way God's designed her universe, every one of them get refined in love. So a Catholic in the sixth sphere of the spirit world doesn't believe the same things as a Catholic on Earth here at the moment, right? A Buddhist in the sixth sphere doesn't believe the same thing as a Buddhist here on Earth at the moment. A Muslim in the sixth sphere doesn't believe the same thing as a Muslim here on Earth. But there are still Muslims and Catholics and Protestants and all sorts of religions in the sixth sphere. All these different ideas, if you like. And the reason why they're all there still is because man in the end created them all. They all came from man. And God refined them by actually saying, you can't progress until you refine this idea. So in other words, until you refine the idea that you can kill another person based on your religious belief, you will never get out of the first sphere of the spirit world, ever. Whether you're here on Earth or in the spirit world, you'll never get out of it until you refine the belief to a point where you realise, actually, if I loved, I wouldn't want to kill anybody for any reason. And when you get to that point, you've now been refined enough to enter the second sphere. And now you'll have refined your beliefs. So anything that was in the Bible before that you read that justified violence, you would now reread and see, oh, well, that must have been another guy who was out of line with truth who wrote that and out of line with love. Can you see that? Now, what God did was God also had this other path, but this other path just keeps going. It's an infinite path. It's infinite because God created it and God herself is infinite. And so therefore the progressional path that God created, it would make sense, would also be infinite. And it goes beyond the six-sphere boundary. The reason why there's a boundary here is only because man by himself, without doing things God's way, can't progress beyond a certain point. And the reason why is because God created your soul in such a way that your intellect is immaterial to its future development after the sixth sphere of the spirit world. In other words, your soul needs to be developed beyond this point, not your intellect. So you can develop your intellect and develop and change your ideas and change your belief systems and everything using the natural love path. So if we call this the natural love path, this path that all these paths that man has created. And by the way, man has created them because man, in the end, wanted to be self-reliant. So that's the point of it.
Can you give us a definition of God and soul?
Certainly. God is an entity who created you and the universe, and God is the great oversoul of the universe. God is actually someone who you personally can connect to with your soul. And what God did was he created your soul, and your soul is dual in nature in that it splits into halves. In other words, it has a masculine half that splits off and usually a feminine half, not always. But the way that a split occurs is I've described in some other material, which you can listen to. And the split occurs and it splits into two forms. A male form generally with two bodies and a female form with two bodies. The bodies being physical and the spiritual bodies. So one half of the soul with the body, two bodies, and the other half of the soul. The soul, the combined soul, is the real you. So you right at the moment are just one half of a soul. And eventually you will meet your soulmate, if you haven't done already, and your entire progression in the future up until the 22nd dimension of the spirit world is about you coming to union with your soulmate. And once you get to that state of union, which is way, way above the sixth sphere, on the divine love path. The divine love path is the only way to obtain union. The reason why it's the only way is because scientifically your soul needs to change in order for it to become completely unified. It needs to get out of this intellect-dominated condition that man has established that is actually self-reliant and into a soul-based feeling dominance that we need to develop and grow. And as we do that, we'll draw our soulmate to us. We'll also progress towards God automatically as we do that, as long as we have the desire for God's love to enter us. And God's love enters us and changes. So as we're progressing on this divine love path, which is infinitely progressive, what's happening is we're learning the same things that these men had to learn. Can you see that? We're learning the same lessons that these men had to learn on this natural love path until we go beyond the seventh sphere or the sixth sphere. And from then on, we're learning a whole set of different lessons that everyone who is intellectually dominant and doesn't want to focus on their soul cannot learn until they become emotional focused. And once they become emotional focused, they then can learn this material from God the same way as these intellectual people learnt the material intellectually, but using your soul or using your emotions instead of your intellect to learn. And it's a totally different way of learning. The best way I could describe to you is like this. You know sportsmen who play different sports. They're honed to perfection in their sport, right? And a lot of times what they do is they practice and practice and practice. And they practice so much that after a while everything just becomes... They enter, all of them say they enter this zone where they're no longer even thinking about what they're doing anymore. They're just in this zone where everything starts happening automatically. And this is the zone that God actually created us for us to live in all the time. This place where everything actually happens automatically not something that we have to learn and practice and practice and practice and practice until we come to know it. And it's only by progressing on the divine love path that you can actually get to the point where the soul is developed into everything happening automatically. So when you ask me a question, I don't have a thought about it at all. The stuff that comes out of me, the reason why it comes out of me straight away, and I don't have to think about it, is because I'm feeling about it. And the feelings automatically are there as soon as you ask your question. And all I need to do is now say the words that my feelings are generating. Does that make sense? So it's a totally different way of interacting with people even. And so as you progress, you'll go beyond this part where man can go. So your original question was about duality. Are we creating duality? No, what I'm saying is the truth, and that is that man has created all these ways that they think are to God, but they all stopped because they were all developed by man's intellect. But God created this other way, which actually is inherently inbuilt in every one of us as a child, that we all detune from a very young age, this other way to connect to God that is infinite in its progression, and that once we understand its principles, we can follow permanently all of the rest of our existence. And we will progress beyond this point. And once we progress beyond that point, we will look back at that point and see that even the progression on this path wasn't duality. It was all just leading us to this point of making a choice between whether we are God-reliant or whether we're going to remain self-reliant. And that's really the choice in the end. So the natural love path is all about self-reliance. And there are beautiful lessons you have to learn in self-reliance. But the divine love path incorporates all those lessons, and in addition to that, teaches you God-reliance, complete God-reliance. Does that sort of help? You can ask more questions.